Father God, I thank you for your grace and mercy through Jesus Christ. I thank you for the faithful who've gone ahead of us, Lord, who really did live lives burning out for the kingdom, giving everything they had all the time. Not perfectly, Lord, and certainly not without doctrinal difficulty or confusion, but we do see the lives of those who just said everything for Christ. And I pray, Father, that you would help us and encourage us in that very thing. Lord, there are certainly ways that we can be examining ourselves and bending our will more toward you, Lord, not in an effort to earn your grace or mercy, but because that's what real life should be. That's what real life is. It's holiness, it's obedience, it's service. It's abiding with you in those things. That's where we're going to find joy. That's where we're going to find peace. That's where we're going to find fulfillment. So, Lord, I pray, help us to learn the lessons of the past and help us to worship you as we go, seeing your sovereign hand at work in all things and at all times. In your name, amen. Well, it's wonderful to have all of you here. We are going to be in chapter 11. If you want to crack your books open to chapter 11, I'll try to give out some page references. I normally write them down. I kind of missed that, so actually I probably won't be giving you page references. But you can follow the bold lettering in your chapter, and you can probably follow where we're going to be. Many of the chapters in this book they're brief, which is great, but that doesn't mean they're easy. Mike had one last week that was a mouthful. It was short, but just loaded with Christological difficulties and working through that and just seeing where the church was. In this chapter, we're facing a massive overhaul. We are resetting the whole board of the Western Empire and talking about the church in that resetting. So I'm going to read a few names to you, and I want you to think about what they all have in common. Joseph, Daniel, Ezekiel, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, Esther, Mordecai, Jeremiah, Jehoiachin. All of these were people who were living for Christ in a certain government that was either overthrown or conquered, or they were just taken out of it completely. But the bottom line is their whole world changed. Even the New Testament church in Acts endured the same thing. As they suddenly became citizens in heaven, suddenly their citizenship in Rome was no longer what it had been, especially as they grew odious to the Romans. And they were no longer a protected class of the Jews. They became their own thing, and they were considered the intellectual and moral dumpster of society. So they endured that persecution. The question for us really is, as we face this chapter, I think, is what is a believer to do? How do we go on existing when our whole world gets flipped upside down? And what we had before, we no longer have now. And I would propose to you that it starts with the promise of Christ. I will build my church. In every place and at every time, the Lord is building his church through his saints, no matter who is in charge. We consider those names I just read you, and we think about the influence that those Christians had on the new regime. Think about what Daniel meant to Nebuchadnezzar, what Joseph meant to Potiphar, or the future king of Egypt. These men continue to live for Christ, with the gospel, and they continue to have a life of impact. Life is really about the gospel, not about the political position or influence or power we may have over our society. At the end of the day, heaven is coming, and we want as many to be there as possibly can. So be thinking about those things as we enter this chapter. What is a believer to do? We are to be salt and light. We are to move forward with the power of the gospel, and we are to maintain a Christ-like demeanor and service. Our game doesn't change when the whole board does. We continue to seek after holiness. So that's what we're after. So with that, I would like to introduce to you in this next slide, if I get the next slide.
No, the other way, towards the computer.
Oh, maybe it's not. It was on. It said it was on. Oh. I think so. Jeff, could you maybe work on that for me? Well, I just don't want to lose the class to this. Thank you so much. All right. So I'd like to introduce to you the Visigoths, and if you could see the slide, you would see their gods. So the Visigoths was a group of Germanic tribes. They were next door to a horrific monstrosity of an army that was growing and taking over everything called the Huns. It was Attila the Hun who was pressuring them, and they decided that they wanted to flee their area. Their area at the time would have been places like Germany, Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, and southeast Russia. They fled from that area trying to get away from the Huns as fast as they could because the Romans were their friends for the most part. They knew how to survive in a Roman society, but there was no surviving in Attila the Hun society. So they moved into the Eastern Empire of Rome. There were main confederacy, and just so you hear their names, if you hear me talk about the Goths, I am referring to the Ostrogoths, the Visigoths, the Franks, the Vandals, the Lombards, the Burgundians, the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes. These were all the tribes that made their way into Eastern Roman Empire right around the same time, fleeing from Attila the Hun. Most of them were converted to Arian Christianity, which is the Christianity that heralds Jesus as a created being and not actually as God. Thank you so much. I'll cue you, Mike. Thank you. All right, so here, this many groups, and hopefully some of these names are familiar to you from just history that you've read in general, but they all kind of came in at the same time. Most of them were converted to Arian Christianity. They considered it a responsibility that if you were going to go into another country seeking asylum, you ought to adhere to their rules and even to their religion. And at the time, it was Emperor Valens, who you remember was actually a very brutal and bloodthirsty Arian emperor. He wanted to root out Catholic Christianity and that view of the Trinity with all his heart. He was the one who beat women in graveyards and set up traps for others. So there wasn't anything very Christian about Valens. But the Saxons and the Goths took to that Christianity, and they actually stuck with it. So on the slide, what you can see is they worshipped Wotan or Woden, who is the chief god. And actually, many of our days of the week are actually named after these pagan gods that they had. Woden became Woden's Day or Wednesday. Thor, the god of thunder, who we all know now, especially from the Avengers. Anyway, it became Thor Day or Thursday. Tiwaz became Tuesday. He's the god of war. Freya, the goddess of fertility, became Friday. And Satyr, a water god, became Satyr's Day or Saturday. So there's still an influence of these cultures on us today. Go ahead, Mike. I'll just say slide. That works. Slide, the conquest of the West. Thank you. So coming into the Roman Empire meant for them embracing the religion of their new home, which, as we said, was Arian Christianity. An Arian bishop named Ulfilas had evangelized many Goths and even translated the Bible into their own language. So I told you several weeks ago, I don't blame you if you don't remember, that the Arians were very zealous in their evangelistic efforts. They were get out there and get it going kind of people. So when all these tribes came in, this was just fertile soil to go plant their gospel, which unfortunately was based on the wrong view of Christ. But they translated the Bible, and I would call that a win, that they actually had a Bible in their hand. So there was hope of actually getting to the truth through that Bible. They became displeased with their situation in Rome, however. They were mistreated. Rome normally had a very smart or savvy way of bringing in new groups. You remember Pax Romana. This is what they would do. They'd go in and they'd conquer, and the goal was to bring that society into their society as fast as they could and maintain a peace. That meant giving their leaders certain positions of leadership. It meant getting their people established quickly in different neighborhoods and zones. It just meant you get them going, you get them working, and you make them Roman. They did not do that with the Goths. To their great misfortune, they mistreated them, and it actually took the Emperor Theodosius coming in to establish the peace. But the peace he established was very shaky. Like the Goths had enough of being mistreated. And they also smelled an opportunity, because Rome at the time was not the Rome we think of. It was not your dad's Rome, you might say. It was a new Rome, which was their military had been hollowed out at this point. They could hardly pay their military leaders. They had a financial problem. They did tax But the problem was the rich always got out of paying taxes and the poor didn't have any money anyway. So they started to fail to pay their soldiers, and their soldiers started to become disgruntled. They tried to make up for that by paying for mercenaries who would work cheaper but weren't loyal to Rome. So everywhere you look, there was political infighting, and no one really had the upper hand or the power to do anything about it, which meant that most of the emperor's commands came out impotent. He couldn't really enforce what he wanted to enforce. And so they saw that weakness and said, this could be ours. Like, we could take this. And that's exactly what they did. And you can see the white line. That's how they progressed. I know you can't really see the numbers, but it takes about 40 years. They begin to move south, come back up, and they decide they're going to take on the crown jewel, which is Italy and the city of Rome itself. So that's the mother city. And in 410, they actually sacked the military. They sacked Rome. Interestingly enough, they killed everyone. They burned everything. The only buildings that were spared were the church buildings, which kind of gives you a flavor for who these guys are. Like, they're loyal to this area in Christianity, but they're barbarous. In fact, the descriptions of them invading Britain are just horrific. I don't know if you got to read that quote in your chapter, but the monk's account of how the Saxons did war, it's blood everywhere and on everything. And he just says, no matter where you look or what you look at, it's blood, blood, blood. So they were very barbarous. This act of sacking Rome sent terror not just through the west, but through the east and the west. Everyone in Rome was terrified of these invading armies and what they were able to accomplish. Jerome in Bethlehem said, or wrote at the time, "My voice is choked, broken with sobs as I dictate this letter. The city that conquered the entire earth has now itself been conquered." This is a little like when the other enemy strikes down your flag and you realize this is the most serious threat we've probably ever encountered. Slide. Thank you, Mike. Again, this one may be a little challenging to see, but all those lines you see moving southwest through Europe, those are all different Germanic tribes. And the thing is, they're all coming at the same time, which makes them incredibly, or if not impossible, to stop. And it was impossible to stop them. The dark green line that cuts through the very middle and heads down into North Africa, that is the Vandals. I don't know if you've ever heard someone called a Vandal before, but yeah, it's not a compliment. It means you're a thieving, marauding scumbag. Anyway. So while the Visigoths ravaged Italy, the Vandals to the north pushed across France and into Spain. And again, there's not really any structure or power, militaristic or otherwise, to really stop them in their tracks. They're just pushing through. It's kind of open house in Western Rome. Led by Genneseric, their king, they crossed the Straits of Gibraltar into northwest Africa in 429. They were violent, destructive, and slaughtered many Catholic inhabitants, such as Augustine of Hippo, who we've come to know. They practiced ethnic cleansing. So when they got there, you left. Like, that was it. You were either exiled or you were killed. Very few remained, and most of those who remained, for example, the bishops who remained, became prisoners. What they found when they invaded North Africa was the treasured and coveted Carthage navy. All those ships became theirs, and they started out as pirates. Then they advanced to an organized military navy fleet, and then they became the #1 power on the Mediterranean seas. That meant they were controlling all the trade routes and who got where. So they're coming into all this power at the same time. As Arians, they saw Orthodox Christianity as aberrant, and they tortured its followers. They sent most of the bishops to Corsica, where they would chop down trees and provide timber for the navy. So it was a rough time to be in North Africa. But remember, those are two big cities, right? Carthage and Alexandria are both located there. So this is going to have a huge effect on the church. Slide. The fall of the Roman Empire in the West. So when did it really, truly happen that they lost control? And this is the scene most people point to as when the West finally died. While the Western Empire tried to withstand the onslaught of the Goths, their puppet emperors were merely overthrown again and again by Goth generals, which is always hard for a team. Just ask no, I won't go there, but I've been on teams that lose over and over, and it's not fun. Anyway, So all this, people just losing confidence left and right in their emperors. So the last general of the Goths to take on Rome was Odovaker, which is like Studebaker. Odovaker, the Goth general who deposed teenage Emperor Romulus Augustulus in 476. Odovaker was then proclaimed the king of Italy. Even after conquering the Goths, though, the Goths, including Odovaker, still thought of themselves as Roman citizens. They thought of themselves as just being part of this empire, no matter how much they were changing the landscape. He was faithful to the Byzantine emperor, sort of. In fact, I think Needham points out that it was very, very convenient to have an emperor who lived so far away in Constantinople, but they still gave a sort of tributary glory to him. In fact, in this picture that you're seeing, Romulus is adhering to Odovaker and giving him the symbol of authority in the West, which Odovaker takes and then sends it to the Eastern Emperor Zero. Slide. All right, which brings us to the Franks. And again, remember, we're asking, how did Christianity thrive? How did Christ bless his church in the midst of this persecution, in the midst of this hostile takeover? So what I've done is I've zoomed in the map here for you a little bit. I don't know if you, I was hoping it'd be a little clearer, but you can see the word to the right in the dead middle of the map, Frankos, going down to the area of Belgium, northern France, and western Germany. That's where we're going to zoom in, and that's where Needham zooms in to talk about something significant that happened for the church. All right, in 496, a crucial event happened, which was to transform the religious destiny of the New West. The Frankish king Clovis, you can see Clovis up there, had married a Burgundian princess called Clotilda. So Clotilda. So there they are, Clovis and Clotilda, I think. Yeah. All right, so Clotilda, interestingly enough, she was a Catholic. She was not Arian. She was a firm believer in the Trinity and the full deity of Christ. So Clotilda begins to minister to her husband. She begins to preach to him the true gospel and encourage him to come to Christ. And he was hard-hearted, no surprise there, right? That's par for the gospel, is preaching to people with hard hearts. But while she tried to persuade him, he continued to resist until there was a rival Germanic tribe that came and posed a threat, a very serious military threat to Clovis. And Clovis prayed to the Lord that his wife had so often spoke to him about. And we get a bit of that prayer there in your text. I'll just read a segment of it. He says, by the way, it's beautifully ignorant as new believer prayers are, but they're sincere, right? They're open, they're honest, they're not tailored, they're just are what they are. He says, "O Jesus Christ, Clotilda holds that you are the Son of the living God. You graciously pour out your assistance on people in trouble, and victory comes to people who put their trust in you. In faith, I cry for your glorious aid. If you will hand me victory over those who attack me, and I get proof of the miracles tasted by those committed to your name, as they say, then I will exercise faith in you and submit to baptism. I have cried to my own gods to help me, but it is painfully obvious they are not going to help me." So he turns his attention to Christ. And as it happens, of course, he wins the battle. I say of course, but the Lord provided victory for him, and he kept his word. He was baptized, and he became a Catholic Christian, and his whole kingdom followed suit. And just speaking on commentary on this, I was thinking of Matthew 5:16. "Let your light shine before men in such a way that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven." Or more specifically, the unique ministry of a believing spouse to an unbelieving spouse. Thinking of 1 Peter 3:1. "In the same way, you wives, be subject to your own husbands, so that even if any of them are disobedient to the word, they may be won without a word by the conduct of their wives." So it reminds me a little bit, I was thinking of the servant girl when she was taken by Naaman, and she ended up speaking to him about the prophet who could actually help him, and he turned and he was healed. So main thing to remember from this is keep preaching. You never know who you're preaching to and how the Lord is going to use that. Slide. All right, this brings us to Gregory of Tours, or what I call the Frankish effect. What happened as a result of this conversion and the impact of Christianity amongst the Frankish people? And Needham zooms in on Gregory of Tours. He wrote the history of the Franks, the story of the Frankish people up to 591, which you can get and read today if you'd like. He was a descendant of Roman aristocracy. There's something to highlight here, which is the Goths were not well educated. They were brutal, they won, but they were not well educated. So for them to rule, they needed help navigating. And that meant reaching for educated people, which was a lot of Roman society. But you'll find a lot of Catholic bishops found their way to become the counselors of these kings and help them navigate the politics and understand church matters, finance, all of these things. So it was uniquely positioned to be an influence there. So Gregory of Tours actually became one of those people. He was elected to Bishop of Tours in 573. Tours was the religious center of the Frankish world, mostly because of the missionary work of Martin of Tours, and I guess hundreds of pilgrims would come every year to see his tomb, and that just made it a religious, sort of a sacred place to be. So Gregory becomes the bishop there. He was energetic, he was vibrant, he was active, he was adored by the people for his advocacy of justice for the poor and oppressed, as well as his commitment to holy living. So here's a man who lives a holy life as much as he possibly can, and he takes care of people who don't have other people to take care of them. I was thinking of Job in Job 29:12. He says, "Because I provided escape for the afflicted who cried for help, and the orphan who had no helper." So that was something Job did. He would sit at the gate, and if someone came and had a political problem or a civil problem, he would help them if there was no advocate for them. So that was the kind of man that Gregory was. In fact, he was so holy, or considered so holy, so what we would call above reproach. He was accused of an indiscretion at a church council, and all he had to do was say it was untrue, and that was it. No one asked for evidence. No one followed up. Everyone just said, you can't really pin anything on this guy because he lives a holy life. But Gregory had his work cut out for him in the Frankish kingdom and serving. He was a counselor to 4 generations, I want to say, of Frankish kings, which is impressive. But one of the main things he had to do was to help them understand that following Christ meant parting with pagan ritual, pagan custom, pagan gods, pagan belief. That can be a challenge for other people coming to Christ today. Sometimes they think they're just adding Jesus to their already, litany of other religions, but that's not it. It's about turning away from those things and setting your hope wholly and completely to the Lord. Gregory wrote, speaking of the Frankish pagans and calling them away from this, he said, "I warned them with earnest exhortation that they should forsake these vanities and turn wholly to God, for no man can serve both Christ and the demons." And you can kind of get a flavor for him by the quote on the slide. Anyone who does exactly what he wishes is plainly in subjection to no one. And what a great thing, right, in discipleship when you sense, an unruly life. Just like, look, your life says you don't obey any master, and there is a master, and you need to follow him. Gregory was looking for Acts 19:19 to happen in the life of the Franks. In Acts 19:19 it says, "Many of those who practiced magic brought their books together and were burning them in the sight of everyone. And they counted up the price of them and found it to be 50,000 pieces of silver. And I think one piece of silver was a day's wages." So they're parting with their lives, burning the past. We don't want it anymore. And that's what he was praying for and looking for to happen in the lives of the Franks, which is an ongoing ministry for sure. All right, next slide. Thanks, Mike. Religious effort in the New West. But what about other kingdoms? That's the Frankish kingdom, but what happened with the other kingdoms? Needham writes, "It took many years of patient, laborious evangelism and teaching by native Catholics to win their new German masters to the Catholic faith. The Vandals in Northwest Africa and the Ostrogoths in Italy never did abandon their Arianism. So that was a kind of a dead place for the gospel. The Vandals were always hostile to Catholic Christianity, but the Ostrogoths became hostile. At first they were tolerant of Catholic Christianity in Italy, but later they became hostile, and that's because they were provoked by an emperor. That was Justin, Byzantine Emperor Justin, declared that Arianism was to be treated as a crime. King Theodoric of the Ostrogoths hit back by persecuting Italian Catholics, and his most famous victim was Boethius. Boethius is a really interesting character for us, I think. He poses some unique challenges. Boethius was, according to Needham, one of the most learned men in human history. Boethius rose to exalted heights of wealth, fame, and power under Theodoric, becoming the king's closest political advisor and head of his civil service. Boethius got himself in trouble, though, when he decided to defend a fellow senator that he felt was wrongly accused of a crime. And at this time, it's very clear that Theodoric was acting as an irrational monarch. If he thought you were at all in league with Rome or the Byzantine emperor, he didn't care about a trial or doing anything fair or right. He would just get rid of you. Boethius, opting to protect the senator, put him on the hot seat. He was arrested for a prolonged period of time. He was later tortured and beaten in the head with clubs until he was dead. There was never any trial, and nor did they ever discover any scent of conspiracy on the guy. So he died wrongfully. He did write a book while he was in prison, though. I think it's called The Consolations of Philosophy, which is interesting. Philosophy doesn't tend to console most people, I don't think. Anyway, just my opinion. But he writes in his book, material goods, earthly pleasures, fame, and power cannot bring real peace to the human soul in any way, but no one can rob Boethius of goodness, the soul's true and eternal treasure, which comes from participating in God himself, who is the supreme good. Now, he envisions philosophy as a woman coming to him, a little bit like in Psalms or in Proverbs, where it kind of personifies wisdom. He does that with philosophy. And he says really good things, participating in God himself, who is the supreme good. All of that sounds really good. But Needham warns us that Boethius was just as much a Neoplatonist as he was a Christian. In fact, in the whole book, he really never mentions Christ directly or indirectly. So this is sort of he's much more comfortable, and I would say like a true philosopher, talking about general truths about God, general truths about the soul, and general truths about life after death. So it really is sort of a philosophical gospel that he highlights at the end. Nevertheless, it became an incredibly impactful work. One of the things that made it impactful or influential was he deals with the problem of evil in that book, which, as you all know, is always a problem, for the church to be wrestling on and working through. And so because he gave a robust and yet again, though, a philosophical answer to that, it was considered wisdom. Next slide, please. All right, education in the West. So Boethius also shaped the basic methods of education which would dominate Western and medieval Europe. Because we have a school meeting on our church grounds, I felt like this was important to say. He is the one who made popular the idea of the trivium, which is incredibly impactful today, and it's really rooted in most educational systems that we have here today. We ran into it heavily when we did homeschool with our kids, and it's also a big influencer in private school. You can see the breakdown of the trivium right here. It really begins with facts and rules. That's where we all sort of start. In fact, the genius of the trivium method is it follows how we learn pattern as humans, not just from youth to adulthood, but anything we set out to learn. This is usually the way we start. We learn the facts, we learn the figures, then we start to enter into the logic and using those and playing them off each other, and then finally the rhetoric, where we can articulate what we've been learning about, what we've been reasoning through. That's just a general pattern that we do. In fact, Mike does that with his sermons. He wrestles with the text, he wrestles with the logic of the text, then he gets up and he presents it to us. So the trivium was incredibly helpful. So a typical day in education in the West would have been, if you were lucky enough to get an education, you either met at your home or in a small shop somewhere. I guess for whatever reason it highlighted barber shops. That was a place where people would go and learn, which is kind of fun. So your morning would be literacy and memorization. You would read as much as you possibly could. Midday would be explanation and analysis of what you read. And the afternoon would be speaking, arguing, and imitating rhetorical styles that you were familiar with that had been effective. So if you're looking for it's not the same thing, but there is an element of this teaching or this natural pattern in Deuteronomy 6:6-7. You read, "These words which I am commanding you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your sons, and shall speak of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up." Good Christian education gets the Bible in front of kids, and then it talks about it. You ask them fun questions, all kinds of questions. You just let them play in the playground you've set up for them. And I would just add, as a parent, I'm so deeply grateful to everyone in the church who had a role like this in my kids' life, getting the truth in front of them and having them talk through it, reason through it. It's wonderful. In fact, most of the New West knowledge of Greek philosophy came from Boethius. So he actually educated much of the Western world on what Greek philosophy had been, because all those things were in danger of disappearing, right? Not getting them back. Oh, I put a Nacho Libre up there. Just go away, read some books, read some books. That's the beginning of the trivium. All right, moving on. Next slide, please. The last stand of the East in the West. So the East didn't go down without a fight. And this is where I've probably been most tempted to take a field trip and a sidebar quest to learn about how this happened. And I'm just telling you now, the story of how this happened is unbelievable, just incredible. I love when you're reading history and suddenly you're like, is that real? That can't be real. So, and I don't know how much of it's embellished or not, but I do know that if you look at the dark orange, when Justinian the Great became emperor, the dark orange is what he owned, what his empire was. When he died, that's the light orange and the dark orange. So you can see how much of the Western world he took back. And that may sound like, oh, cool. But when you understand what Justinian had to go against, what he had to do before he could ever even think about going west, well, just here's a little list. First of all, he had been a peasant initially. He rose to power through his uncle, Justin, who we just read about. Justin had been a pig farmer who became a soldier, and apparently he was such a good soldier. He was so good at what he did and leading men, even though he didn't have an education. He got onto the palace guards, and then eventually became the leader of the palace guards. And through a whole series of political intrigues, he came to power. He had Justinian, his nephew, become his adopted son. And what he did is he created an ally in Justinian. He trained Justinian. Justinian got a first-class education. Justinian was also taught to know who everyone was, what their power was, what their influence was. So he was literally raising kind of a war concierge, or whatever they're called, so that he would help him. And he did. He helped him tremendously. It's so much so that Justinian was able to hang on to the empire when there were other more valid options to go with. So he had to deal with all of that. He rose to power despite legitimate claims to the throne by others. He had to rebuild the taxation strategies. Justinian knew you can't do anything without money, so he had to redo all that. So he hired a thug, a mobster, basically, to become the head of the taxation. And this guy had a really simple method. If you were rich and you didn't pay your taxes, you were kidnapped, beaten, left in the street, humiliated, and told that you and your family would die if you didn't pay your taxes. And so they paid their taxes, and the revenue started pouring in to Rome. He also had a terrible legal system. There were over 15,000 volumes of Roman law. No one followed any one particular branch over the other, and that meant all the systems of justice were getting clogged. So if you had a case against someone else, the chance of it getting resolved were so remote. So what does he do? He hires another guy, and that brilliant legal mind that condensed all those volumes into 50 volumes, codified them, made them the law of the land for everybody. So suddenly all the cases are getting pushed through the court. Suddenly justice is happening, or forms of justice are happening. In fact, Justinian's real power or strategy was he was intensely pragmatic. He only cared about you that you could get the job done. That was it. That was he didn't care about your morals. He didn't care about your ethics. He just wanted to see you get the job done, which we would say today is crazy, and it ended up costing him a lot. But what he accomplished through this pragmatism, which is certainly not an endorsement of pragmatism, especially in the Lord's church, where character very much does matter. In fact, character is the ministry, right? But if you're looking for a bad guy to sort of be like, nice. No, I'm kidding. Anyway. All right. Justinian's great power was in knowing who to put in charge, and he did. So I'll avoid talking about him anymore. So what he did is once he got everything under control, once he defeated the Persians to the east of them, once he defeated the chariot racing guilds, once he defeated all these, he turned his attention to the west, and he sent his general, who was a profound military thinker and all-around good guy, basically. He sends him over, and he does a feint. What he does is, now they have money, he sends money to the Ostrogoths and to the Vandals, to the rebels, and he says, build a revolt and make it potent enough to where it gets their attention. So they did. They started launching small naval attacks on the ships of the Vandals. And sorry, this is fun for me. Anyway, he gets their attention, and they leave their cities to go deal with these uprisings, and that's when they march in. And they still could have been conquered, but they didn't. They made it. They destroyed. And the thing about Justinian and his generals is they really thought this was the beginning of taking back the West completely, that they weren't going to have any more trouble. But that's not what happened. In fact, when they defeated the Vandal general said, how much is Justinian after? And they said, the whole West. And he said to him, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Your emperor's chasing the wind. That's never going to happen. And sure enough, no sooner had they removed the Vandals, removed the Ostrogoths, than other Germanic tribes immediately flooded in. In Italy, it was the Lombards. They came running in to pick up all that power that was left there. And so while they could fight one war successfully, they couldn't fight 50. They couldn't just keep doing war after war after war. So that was when the West was truly lost to the Eastern Empire, but not to Catholic Christianity. The East laid open to Catholic Christianity for evangelism. All right, slide. That brings us to Benedict of Nursia. Listen and attend with the ear of your heart. So Benedict plays an influential role because monasticism is so powerful and so growing, especially in Britain. Monasticism plays a leading role in the evangelism. These are the guys they're training up. These are the guys they're sending out to plant more monasteries, to be other centers of influence in other countries. So one guy who had a huge effect on these monastic or these monasteries was Benedict. He was a native of Nursia, which is in Italy. He was sent to study in Rome, but he was so shocked by the corrupt city lifestyle that he returned home. He lived as a hermit for a time and was rocked by intense sexual temptation. This was a real war. This was probably the war in his life. He fought temptation by rolling naked on thorns and nettles. So he had a painful method of dealing with these thoughts. It was very ascetic. And we don't know. In fact, it doesn't record to us what else he did. You know, if he was praying or memorizing, or we don't know. We just know that he was doing these things. Anyway, he emerged from these battles of temptation as, what Needham writes, an awesome holy man who seemed to control the very forces of nature. So this plays well as a story about how you can beat yourself into holiness, but I wouldn't take it that way. But whatever happened, he seemed to get some kind of level of self-control and also became a man that they considered, as he says, awesomely holy. In 529, he founded the famous monastery of Monte Cassino, where he preached, fed the poor, healed the sick, supposedly in a miraculous way at times, and attracted a young army of disciples. Young men wanted to be around this guy because of his life. He outlined the monastery schedule, how they would select an abbot, how they would make decisions, and how they would remain economic and self-sufficient. So he wasn't just pastoral, he was practical as far as how they were going to stay self-sustained. He's the one who made all the monks sleep 8 hours a day, which I think is also why they liked him. He made them sleep. He writes, the wisdom, balance, and practical nature of Benedict's rule as a guide for community life soon made it the most popular and widely used for all monastic rules throughout the Western world. It is known simply as the Benedictine rule, and people often call Benedict the father of Western monasticism. All right, next slide. So next influential figure during this time was Gregory the Great, or Pope Gregory, and the papacy. So, the Gothic invaders to North Africa and Britain practiced ethnic cleansing, and when they moved in, you moved out. However, most of the Germanic tribes did not do this. Needham explains, having conquered, they lived at peace with their Roman subjects. So they wanted to get life going again. Let's make normalcy our new goal. This meant that Catholic bishops often ended up leading in civil affairs as well as religious. So this is a new way that they can influence, is they're being given civil power to talk about, who runs the fire department, who the police station, or who makes decisions in law courts. It would be exciting to see Christian men, as it always has been exciting to see Christian, godly men and in those positions. The new challenge of the Catholic Church was how to use this advantage, like a Joseph or a Daniel, to the advantage of the gospel. A wise navigator was needed, and the church found one in Gregory the Great, Pope from 590 to 604. So the real importance of this man is that he's guiding all the Catholic Christians from his patriarchal point. So they're taking their cues from him on what to do and how to do. But he faced 4 primary challenges, and you can see them up on the slide. Political leadership, church leadership, theology, and church worship were all matters of challenge from where they were. The invading Lombards had to be reasoned with, and Eastern Rome was incapable of doing anything. Gregory saw that the Roman Empire in the East was incompetent. Like, they weren't able to actually broker peace or manage deals. They weren't on the ground. They weren't close. So he took it upon himself, which is a move that no one else would have dared to do, to actually do that, to broker peace for the people in Italy. Church leadership, much work needed to be done to convert Germanic invaders from Arianism to Catholicism. The Frankish church was seizing bishopric offices and selling them for money. So that was something that he had to put a stop to as fast as he possibly could. Otherwise, you're going to get a lot of Arian bishops. There were other, still the Donatist party was still around. The Manichaeism was still around. So those who took an aberrant view of church polity and those who took an aberrant view of, even worse, the Holy Spirit, they're still around. So he is working on that. Further, the Byzantine emperor was trying to make a single patristic head over the 5 patriarchs of the Catholic Church. I find this really interesting. So here is Gregory the First. He's the Pope, right? But in the East, they're trying to make one guy the head over all 5 churches, all 5 districts. And I think it was like Jerusalem, Antioch, Rome, Carthage might have been one, Constantinople. Anyway, I'm sorry, I can't name them all for you right away. But all of them had districts and areas they were in control of, and they worked together. Rome was considered the first of the, leader of leaders. So they took a leading role, but they were in no way given some office of authority or power over the rest. But the East was trying to do that. So he fought that tooth and nail. He said, whoever calls himself the universal priest or desires that title is by his pride the forerunner of Antichrist. Gregory called himself and the other patristic leaders the servant of the servants of God. He said, we're low, we're not high. And I love that, but I wish that the future popes had stuck with it, because that was in fact, many future popes quote this, but they don't mean it the same way. So very interesting to me. As for theology, we kind of hinted on it before, but what was Gregory's theology? He believed in depravity and the sovereignty of God. He loved Augustine. He read Augustine. He believed in believers' baptism by the Holy Spirit. However, he also believed that one must make atonement for the sins they commit after water baptism with acts of loving service. So there is a semi-Pelagian works stuff going on in his doctrine of salvation. He believed in purgatory. Up until then, belief in purgatory was something that you could kind of go either way on. There wasn't a set rule about purgatory. He made it part of Western dogma that purgatory was real. Unsurprisingly then, he believed you could hold masses or communion for the dead to help souls move on from purgatory. But just as a footnote to us living on this side of history, it would be an error to call him a Roman Catholic. He was not a Roman Catholic. Needham writes, Gregory the Great's church had no indulgences, no doctrine of icon veneration or transubstantiation, no vicar of Christ claims for the popes, and no immaculate conception claims for Mary. Add to that also, they didn't have, the 5 sacraments, and they didn't have systems of penance. None of that was there. These and other novelties emerged long after the 6th century, and we're talking like in 500 years, those things start to really roll out and take solid shape. Church worship, Gregory was not in favor of church images or icons of Christ, except that they help the illiterate understand and grasp biblical truth, which I thought was an interesting way to say if the guy can't read, a picture might be nice for him to see. He introduced hymns to the church to be sung in a chanting style known today as the Gregorian chant. So, would you guys like to sing one with me? We can chant. No. By the way, that's the way I learned Greek nouns, was through Gregorian chants. Anyway, sorry. Very fun. I notice we don't do that anymore, though, Mike. Is there a reason? Or no? Okay. Anyway, people loved kind of especially the Celts, they loved the haunting melody of it. They loved that it sounded like something unearthly. It sounds like the elves in Rivendell when they sing. It just has this sort of thing. And I guess the church ate it up. But then there were many that were really well written and really good. Slide. Speaking of the Celts and the conversion of the English. All right. So in that circle, you can't read it at all. I just have given up on you guys ever being able to read these maps. But in the orange, that is where the Kentish men live. And that's where we're going to zoom in next, the Kentish men. So Gregory had a strong missionary heart for the invaded Celtic peoples and for the godless, ruthless invaders who had destroyed them. So Britain was an absolute mess. The orange, or the yellow you see up there, that's where all the Celts, the natives, those native to the land of Britain, that's where they had been pushed back to. And the invaders are the Germanic tribes, all the pink. That's where your Saxons and your Jutes and others pushed in and just wreaked havoc on them. So it's very much, literally right down the middle of the island is divided. So Gregory sees this and he says, I want to see the gospel heal this thing. So how can that work? So he sends Augustine of Canterbury with several Benedictine monks to go and evangelize the pagan hordes. They were so scared, they turned back once and Augustine had to rouse them to try again. They were terrified that they were just going to be torn limb from limb as soon as they got there. All their worries were unfounded, though. King Ethbert of Kent, there the circle where the Kentish men are, he welcomed them surprisingly and encouraged them to preach their gospel. Ethbert was impressed by the lifestyles of the monks and the beauty and majesty of their worship. So how they lived was attractive to Ethbert, and the fact that they disdained the thing that he worshipped was powerful to him. Nevertheless, Augustine was able to report to Gregory. Soon Ethbert became a Catholic Christian himself and would have commanded his nation to do the same. But Augustine of Canterbury told him it would be wrong to force this on your people. Belief shouldn't be forced. They should come to that decision on their own. But they evangelized, and the result was that 10,000 citizens of Kent were baptized. So they had a huge impact there. Gregory responded by making Augustus the Archbishop of the Catholic Church in England. King Ethbert, and I think this speaks volumes of King Ethbert's conversion, King Ethbert gave him his own palace at Canterbury. So Augustine is the first Archbishop of Canterbury. That's where he comes around. So fun, these things we've heard all our lives. Got to be like, oh, that's where that comes from. All right, the Celts, however, what's going on with the Celts? Notice that Gregory focused first on the invading hordes because the Celts had a form of Christianity already. For them, the challenge was different. It wasn't about bringing them to Catholic Christianity. It kind of was. It was about bringing them under submission to the ecumenical church because they had been existing outside of that for a while. The Celts were forced from their homes. They had already been Christian in the days of Roman rule. However, they were monastery-centered, not bishop-centered, which is interesting. So the abbot was the voice of authority, not the elders, not the presbyters. So they would always go to see the abbot if they had problems. It did not see itself as having to come under the authority of the patriarch of the West or any other leading group for that matter. They're like, no, we're doing fine. We're preaching. We're good. All right. Two great missionaries of the Celtic Church, I should say, I'm sorry, I believe I left out a quote here, but I did want to say that they had I've got it later, apologies. Two great missionaries of the Celtic Church are Patrick, the Apostle of Ireland, who you guys know as St. Patrick, and Columba, the Apostle of Scotland. So the Celtic Church never stopped being active and sending out people with an earnest evangelistic hunger and desire to go see people saved. Despite the health and spiritual vitality of the Celtic churches, they remained reluctant to embrace Gregory's, not mission. They wanted to go where the gospel wasn't. They really struggled with going to their invaders to preach the gospel to them. There was 150 years of bitterness and barbarism between the Germanic invaders and the Celts. They didn't, and it was bad. They didn't agree with the authoritative view or posturing of Augustine or Gregory. They felt Augustine was condescending and that he wasn't taking them seriously and wouldn't listen to their arguments. So they didn't agree that the bishop and not the abbot would have the final authority in the local church. So they stood their ground on that. They didn't celebrate Easter at the same time as the ecumenical Catholic Church did. And believe it or not, that became a hot topic. When do you celebrate Easter? And remember, they're putting more emphasis on the validity of things. Like your validity wasn't, remember this came up earlier, your baptism wasn't valid to them if it was in an Arian church. Like you needed to be baptized in a Catholic church. So even holidays and times of celebration became truly celebrated if it was the right date for Easter. They had their own date for Easter, and they didn't agree with the Catholic Church. And they gave their spiritual leaders different kinds of haircuts. And believe it or not, that became an issue. Slide, Mike, if you would. There they are. The two hotly debated haircuts. I kind of wish we still did this, frankly. Anyway. So yeah, they even disagreed on how to do that. So you had the Celtic version and then you had the Roman version. All right. Needham warns us that sometimes Protestants, that's us, think of the power struggle between the Celtic and Roman Catholics as being a battle between Protestant-minded Celts and Roman Catholicism as we know it today. But that is not true. Rome was simply championing the custom observed by the whole of the church throughout East and West, with the Celts alone being out of step. It was only the Celts who didn't come under authority that had been practiced for now, 400 or 500 years. Also, the Celts did not answer the claims of Rome with Scripture alone, so it's wrong to call them Protestants. They weren't. They didn't say the Bible doesn't say that. That would have been different if they had, but they didn't. They answered with another tradition. They just simply said, but this is how we do it. And later on, they made a claim that the Apostle John taught them to do it this way, which is funny because there was no monastic movement during the Apostle John. They weren't loyal to elder rule, but monastic rule, which is very, very un-Protestant. We don't do the monastery. Celtic Christianity, in refusing to be grafted into the patriarchal way of doing things, created an alternate or competing form of Christianity. Now this we do understand a little bit more, right? We understand in the form of denominations. You can come to our church, you're going to get a brand, but you could also go to the Southern Baptist Church, you could go to, who claim to be preaching the same things and doing the same things, but are they really? So the Roman Catholic Church suddenly had a competing church, you might say. Celt Aidan Lindisfarne led a missionary wave into northern kingdom of Northumbria at the request of King Oswald, who wanted his people to know about the Christian faith. Aidan and his monks worked tirelessly forming a monastery, doing the work of a bishop, and producing copies of the scriptures with beautiful illustrations, which you can still see today. Aidan's work was so impactful that he has been called the true father of English Christianity, not the first Archbishop of Canterbury, Augustine. Can you go to the next slide, Mike? So in the yellow, that's Northumbria. So that is where Aidan came. Again, a Celtic Christian. You can see a picture of him there. Not a real one, obviously, but a depiction of him in his ministry. What's really unique about this ministry is the relationship that Oswald had with Aidan, that they were working together for the evangelism of their people. One beautiful picture the historian gives us is of Aidan preaching in the Celtic tongue and the King Oswald himself translating for the people to understand. So here you've got the king translating what the preacher is saying so the people can understand, which is really, really beautiful. It reminded me a little bit of like Ezra and Nehemiah. You know, Aidan was a set your heart to study the law of the Lord, to know it and to do it. And Nehemiah was the leader making things happen, and that was Oswald making things happen in Northumbria. Now, you know, another great pair you could think of would be Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar when Nebuchadnezzar repents and comes to the Lord. And what a team that must have been. We don't read anything about it, but man, I can only imagine what they got done. As monasticism grew in Northumbria, King Oswy, brother of Oswald, decided that the Celtic versus Roman controversy must come to an end. These guys have to get on the same team. A house divided cannot stand. He summoned a synod at Whitby in 664. Both sides presented their cases and argued for their acceptance. In the end, a young monk named Wilfrid won the day for Rome and would eventually become a bishop of York. So while Celtic Christianity didn't go out without a fight, they did begin to swing to the Roman way of doing things. And one thing that really helped was the rules of Benedict for monasteries. Because it was such a good form for monasteries, that was one of the first things they really began to accept, and the rest of it sort of fell in place. All right. Oh, and then the crown jewel of this whole chapter is, while Celtic Christianity died hard, both the Celts and Roman Catholics were coming together for missions. And then they didn't stop until one by one, each kingdom of the New West fell to Christianity. And Christianity, once again, Catholic Christianity, became the religion of the land. So did it work? Absolutely. And the last slide I want to give you is the Venerable Bede. Can someone give me a time check? I can't quite see. Oh, wow. All right. The Venerable Bede. So we're going to give Venerable Bede a passing salute. He references Bede a couple times in this. So Bede is a monk of the Benedictine monastery of Jarrow, became known as the father of English history for writing church history of the English people, the chief source of early English Christianity up to the 8th century. So this is an incredible resource that we use. He was one of the most educated Western Europeans of this era, mastering Latin, Greek, and Hebrew, and drawing deeply from Augustine of Hippo. I should add, learning all of those languages at a time where they weren't being learned. They had stopped teaching these. So it's no surprise to me that he had a profound understanding of what he was writing about. Beyond history, he wrote sermons, poems, letters, biographies, including one on Cuthbert. He wrote biblical commentaries and even translated the Gospel of John into English. His humility, devotion, and gentle character made him beloved across Christian traditions, and his recorded dying words deeply shaped the English Christian memory. From the 10th century onward, he became known as the Venerable Bede, meaning worthy of honor and veneration. So it's guys like this that make a class like this even possible for us to know what happened and how. All right, well, that's it. We're out of time, and I think Mike has a baptism meeting to get to, so I'll just pray, and we'll go from there. Lord God, thank you so much for this time we've had. Thank you again for the example set before us. Thank you for the instruction we have from history. We're so thankful that your commands are timeless and for all places. Lord, always the end game is to obey. Always the end game is to trust you and to do what is right, no matter what changes in our lives. So I pray, Lord, increase our faith and call us to that. In your name, amen.